The story begins with a man named Marcus. He was in his mid-30s, a tall black man with tired eyes that told a story of years filled with struggle. His life had not been easy. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood, he learned very early that nothing came without effort. His mother raised him and his two younger sisters almost single-handedly after his father walked out when Marcus was just a boy. From that day on, Marcus felt a silent responsibility to protect his family, and that sense of duty shaped his entire life. Even as a teenager, Marcus worked odd jobs to bring some money home. He worked at grocery stores, washed cars, delivered newspapers, and even helped in small shops just to put food on the table. When other kids were busy enjoying their weekends, Marcus was counting coins and wondering how to help his mother stretch every dollar. His friends often told him he looked older than his age, and maybe they were right. The weight of responsibility had made him grow up faster than he wanted. Years later, when he became a man, things didn't really get easier. He finished school but couldn't afford to go to college. Instead, he worked long hours in warehouses, construction sites, and restaurants. Each job gave him just enough to survive but never enough to build a future. Rent, bills, and basic needs consumed everything. Marcus dreamed of a better life, not just for himself but for his family. He wanted to reach a place where he could finally breathe without worrying about the next paycheck. One day, Marcus came across a job opening. It wasn't just any job, it was the kind of opportunity that could change his life. It was a position in a respected company that valued hard work, and if he got in, it would mean stability and growth. For the first time in years, Marcus felt a spark of hope. He told himself, "This could be it. This could be the chance I've been waiting for." The problem was, the interview was in another city, and he needed to take a flight to get there. Buying the ticket was not easy. He used up the little savings he had, even skipped paying some bills, just to secure it. When he finally held that ticket in his hand, he felt both scared and excited. Scared because so much depended on it, and excited because maybe, just maybe, his struggles were about to end. The night before the flight, Marcus could hardly sleep. He lay on his old couch, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts. He thought of his mother, who always told him, "Good things come to those who keep trying." He thought of his sisters, who still looked up to him even when he felt like he was failing. He thought of his empty wallet, his overdue bills, and the fact that his fridge held little more than a half carton of milk and a loaf of bread. He told himself that if this job worked out, he would finally be able to take care of everyone, not just survive but live. When the morning came, Marcus woke up early, put on his best shirt, the only one that still looked decent, and polished his worn-out shoes until they shined as much as they could. He packed a small bag, double-checked the flight details, and whispered a small prayer before stepping out of his tiny apartment. The air was cool, and the city was just waking up. With every step he took toward the bus stop, his heart beat faster. This day felt different, and he carried a sense of nervous excitement inside him. As he reached the airport, Marcus couldn't help but look around. He saw people rushing with fancy suitcases, dressed in sharp suits, and holding expensive phones. For a moment, he felt out of place. His suitcase was old, his shirt slightly faded, and his shoes had scratches no amount of polishing could hide. But he shook those feelings away. He wasn't here to compete in looks, he was here to grab a chance at life. Inside, he checked the screens for his flight and hurried to the line. Every step closer to the gate felt like a step closer to a new future. Marcus could almost imagine himself in the new job, wearing an ID badge, earning a steady paycheck, and calling his mother with the good news. He smiled quietly at the thought. But deep inside, fear still whispered. What if he failed the interview? What if they didn't like him? What if all his sacrifices ended in disappointment? He shook his head and reminded himself of everything he had already overcome. He was not a quitter. He had lived through struggles many people couldn't even imagine, and he was still standing. That, in itself, was proof of his strength. As the announcement for boarding drew closer, Marcus felt his nerves rising. He checked his watch again and again, making sure he wasn't late. He clutched his bag tightly, ready to move. This flight was not just about reaching another city, it was about reaching a dream he had carried for years. At that moment, he thought about his life up to this point. The nights he went hungry so his sisters could eat. The mornings he walked miles to work because he couldn't afford the bus. The countless times he was overlooked, underpaid, or dismissed because of where he came from. But he also thought of his resilience, his kindness, and his determination. These were the things that defined him more than his struggles. For Marcus, this journey was more than a trip to a job interview. It was a journey of hope, faith, and the belief that even the most tired soul can find new beginnings. He carried with him the silent prayers of his mother, the unspoken admiration of his sisters, and the weight of his own dreams. Every step toward that gate was heavy with meaning, and he didn't know that the real test of his character was waiting just around the corner. Marcus walked quickly through the airport, his heart racing. His flight was boarding soon, and every minute mattered. He clutched his ticket in one hand and his old bag in the other. This was his one chance, and he couldn't let anything slow him down. The crowd moved fast around him, people in business suits checking their watches, families with children dragging colorful bags, travelers sipping coffee as if they had all the time in the world. Marcus didn't notice much of it. His eyes were focused only on the signs pointing him toward his gate. He moved with purpose, weaving through the crowd. But then, something caught his attention. Near one of the seating areas, he saw an elderly woman. She looked small and fragile, her white hair neatly tied back, but her movements were slow and unsteady. She was struggling with a suitcase that seemed far too heavy for her thin arms. Every time she tried to lift it, it tipped to the side, nearly pulling her with it. People passed by, some glancing at her, some ignoring her completely, each caught up in their own world. Marcus slowed down. His mind spoke two different voices at once. One voice said, "Keep going. You don't have time. You cannot miss this flight. This interview could change your life." The other voice said, "She needs help. You can't just walk past her. That's not who you are." For a few seconds, Marcus hesitated. His feet almost stopped moving. He looked at his watch. He had maybe 10 minutes to get to his gate. His chest tightened with worry. But when he saw the old woman bend over again, her face showing strain, he sighed deeply. He knew the choice he had to make, even if it cost him everything. He walked toward her. "Ma'am, let me help you with that," he said gently. The woman looked up, surprised. Her eyes were tired but kind, and her lips formed a small smile. "Oh, thank you, son," she said softly. Her voice trembled as if she wasn't used to people stopping for her. Marcus lifted the suitcase with ease. It wasn't very heavy for him, but he could see why it had been too much for her. He asked her where she was headed, and she explained she was trying to find her gate but had gotten confused with all the signs. She wasn't used to airports, and the rush of people had left her feeling lost and overwhelmed. "Don't worry," Marcus assured her. "I'll take you there." As they walked together, Marcus carried her suitcase in one hand and held his bag in the other. The woman moved slowly, and Marcus matched his pace to hers, even though inside he was anxious. Every step they took seemed like a step farther away from his own gate. He kept glancing at the signs, doing silent math in his head, wondering if he still had time. But whenever he looked down at the woman, he saw the gratitude in her eyes, and it gave him strength to keep going. She told him her name was Mrs. Thompson. She was traveling to see her daughter for the first time in over a year. Her daughter had been begging her to come, but traveling alone at her age frightened her. Marcus listened patiently, nodding, offering words of comfort. He didn't tell her about his own worries. He didn't mention the flight he might be losing. At that moment, it didn't feel right to make the conversation about himself. When they finally reached her gate, Mrs. Thompson sighed with relief. "Oh, I don't know what I would have done without you," she said. Her hand rested gently on his arm, as if to say thank you without words. Marcus smiled, though inside his heart was pounding. He quickly checked his watch. His flight was boarding now, and his gate was on the other side of the terminal. Panic rushed through him. He said a polite goodbye, wished Mrs. Thompson safe travels, and hurried off as fast as he could. He ran through the airport, weaving between people, his old shoes pounding against the shiny floor. He reached his gate breathless, only to see the worst sight possible: the door was closed. The plane was still there, visible through the window, but the staff shook their heads. "I'm sorry, sir. Boarding is closed," one of them said firmly. Marcus tried to explain, his voice desperate. "Please, I just helped someone, I was only a few minutes late. This flight is everything for me." But the rules were rules. The plane wouldn't wait for him, no matter what reason he gave. As he stood there, defeated, a wave of disappointment crashed over him. His stomach twisted, and his chest felt heavy. This interview had been his chance, and now it was gone. All the sacrifices he had made, spending his last money on the ticket, skipping meals, staying up late preparing answers, suddenly felt wasted. He sat on a bench near the gate, his bag at his feet, his face buried in his hands. He thought about what his mother would say. She always taught him to help others, to do the right thing even when it was hard. He knew she would be proud of him for helping the old woman, but right now, pride didn't pay rent. Pride didn't put food on the table. Around him, the airport buzzed with life: people boarding planes, children laughing, announcements echoing through the halls. But Marcus felt like the world had gone silent. He was trapped in his own storm of regret. He wondered if he had made a mistake. Should he have walked past the woman? Should he have chosen his future over kindness? Deep down, though, he knew the truth. Helping her had been the right thing to do. He couldn't have lived with himself if he had ignored her. Even if it cost him this chance, he would not have changed his choice. Still, knowing that didn't make the pain any easier. Marcus dragged himself back to the ticket counter, hoping maybe there was a way to rebook the flight. But the fees were far more than he could afford. His wallet held barely enough to cover a meal, let alone another ticket. The employee at the counter looked at him with sympathy but could only repeat the policy. With heavy steps, Marcus left the airport. The bus ride back to his apartment felt longer than ever. He stared out the window, watching the city pass by, his thoughts heavy and dark. He thought about the bills waiting for him, the empty fridge, and now the lost chance at the job interview. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world had settled there. When he finally reached home, he placed his bag in the corner and sat on the couch. The silence of his small apartment wrapped around him like a blanket. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. "Did I do the right thing?" he whispered to himself. His heart told him yes, but his tired mind told him no. At that moment, Marcus didn't know what the future would hold. He didn't know that the woman he had helped would remember him more than he could ever imagine. He didn't know that his small act of kindness, done in the middle of his own storm, would set the stage for something far greater than the job he had missed. Marcus sat in his apartment that night, staring at the dim ceiling light above him. The room was quiet except for the faint sound of traffic outside. His heart still felt heavy from what had happened at the airport. Missing that flight felt like missing his future. He had imagined walking into that interview with confidence, shaking hands with the managers, and finally having a chance to prove himself. Now, all of it was gone, like sand slipping through his fingers. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands pressed against his forehead. 1,000 thoughts filled his mind. Why me? Why now? Haven't I suffered enough already? The questions kept circling, but no answers came. His rent was due in just a week, his electricity bill already had a red warning slip, and his fridge was nearly empty. That interview was supposed to be his way out of this cycle. Instead, here he was, back at square one. Marcus sighed deeply and stood up, walking slowly to the kitchen. He opened the fridge and stared at the half-empty shelves. A bottle of water, a half-used stick of butter, 2 eggs, and a loaf of bread, that was all he had. He made himself a simple sandwich and sat at the small table, chewing slowly. Even food felt heavy in his mouth because his thoughts were heavier. He pulled out his old notebook, where he kept his plans and dreams written down. On the front page, he had scribbled, "Never give up. Keep moving." It was something his mother had always told him, and he kept it there as a reminder. But tonight, those words felt distant, almost like they belonged to someone else. The next morning, Marcus forced himself to go to work. He had a part-time job unloading boxes at a warehouse. The pay was low, the hours long, and the work exhausting, but he couldn't afford to miss a single shift. As he lifted heavy crates, sweat rolling down his forehead, his mind kept drifting back to the airport. He replayed the scene again and again, the old woman struggling, his decision to help, and the moment the gate closed. Sometimes he felt angry with himself for stopping, and other times he felt proud for doing the right thing. The war inside his mind never stopped. That evening, when he returned home, he found a letter from his landlord taped to the door. It was a reminder about the rent. If he didn't pay soon, he risked losing his place. Marcus held the letter in his hand, staring at the bold words. He felt a lump in his throat. "What more can I take?" he whispered. He didn't cry, he was too used to hardship to cry easily, but his chest ached with the weight of it all. Meanwhile, miles away, Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman he had helped, thought about Marcus. She had made it safely to her daughter's home, but she couldn't shake the memory of the man who had gone out of his way for her. She remembered the kindness in his eyes, the way he carried her bag without complaint, and the gentle way he spoke to her. She also remembered something else, the quiet sadness she had noticed in his face. It was the kind of sadness she had seen before in people who carried too much on their shoulders. At dinner with her daughter, Mrs. Thompson brought up the man. "There was this young man at the airport who helped me," she said. "He missed his flight because of me." Her daughter frowned. "Really? That's awful for him." "Yes," Mrs. Thompson nodded, her voice soft. "But he never showed anger. Not once. He smiled and told me not to worry. I could see he was struggling, though. His clothes were neat but worn, and his shoes looked old. There was a heaviness about him, as if life had been very hard." Her daughter shrugged. "Well, kind people don't always get what they deserve. That's just how the world is." But Mrs. Thompson didn't agree. She believed kindness should never go unnoticed. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about Marcus. She wondered if he had lost something important because of her. She wished she had asked him for his name, his number, something that would let her thank him properly. Back in his apartment, Marcus lay awake on his couch. Sleep didn't come easily anymore. His mind replayed not just the flight he had missed but the years of struggle that had led him here. He thought of his father, who had walked out years ago, leaving his mother to carry the family alone. He thought of all the jobs he had taken, jobs that broke his back but never gave him security. He thought of his sisters, who still looked up to him as if he were their hero, even when he felt like he was failing them. He whispered into the darkness, "I'm trying, Mama. I really am." The following days were no easier. Marcus kept going to work, dragging his tired body back and forth, but inside he felt drained. He avoided his friends because he didn't want to explain what had happened. He avoided his mother's calls because he didn't want her to hear the defeat in his voice. He smiled at his co-workers when they spoke to him, but the smile never reached his heart. Every time he walked past the airport posters in town, bright pictures of planes soaring into the sky, he felt a stab of pain. Those posters reminded him of the opportunity he had lost. He wondered if the people who interviewed others that day thought of him at all, or if he was just another name crossed off the list. Mrs. Thompson, on the other hand, couldn't let go of the memory of Marcus. She asked her daughter to help her figure out if there was a way to find him. "I need to thank him," she insisted. "That young man gave up something important for me, and I can't sit here pretending it didn't matter." Her daughter looked doubtful. "Mom, airports are full of people every day. How can you possibly find him?" But Mrs. Thompson was determined. She remembered details: his kind eyes, his tired shoes, the sound of his voice. She believed she would find him somehow. For Marcus, life carried on in its slow, heavy way. The days blurred together: work, bills, worry, and long nights of staring at the ceiling. But deep inside, he still held on to something small, almost invisible: hope. Though disappointment weighed on him, a quiet voice inside whispered that his story wasn't finished yet. And he didn't know it, but far away, someone else was carrying that hope for him too. Someone who believed his act of kindness was not the end of his story but the beginning of something greater. The days after missing the flight dragged on slowly for Marcus. Every morning, he woke up with the same heavy feeling pressing on his chest. He went to work, carried boxes, came back home, and sat quietly in his small apartment. Life felt like it was standing still, as though the world was moving forward but he was stuck in one place. Bills piled up on his table, and every letter in the mail seemed to bring more bad news. He tried to keep his spirits up, but loneliness and disappointment made it hard. Sometimes, he found himself staring at the ceiling late at night, wondering if things would ever change. One evening, after a long day at the warehouse, Marcus returned home more tired than usual. His back ached from lifting heavy crates, and his hands were rough from the work. He opened the door, dropped his bag in the corner, and sat down on his worn-out couch. He wanted nothing more than to rest in silence. But just as he closed his eyes, there was a knock at the door. At first, Marcus ignored it. He wasn't expecting anyone, and usually, no one visited him. The knock came again, louder this time. He frowned, slowly stood up, and walked to the door. When he opened it, his eyes widened in shock. Standing there was Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman from the airport. She wore a neat coat and had a warm smile on her face. For a moment, Marcus thought he was dreaming. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, but she was still there. "Hello, Marcus," she said softly. He froze. How do you know my name?" he asked, his voice filled with surprise. She smiled gently. "I asked around. It took me some time, but I couldn't stop thinking about you. You helped me when you didn't have to, and I needed to find you." Marcus didn't know what to say. He stepped aside, and she walked into his small apartment. She looked around the room, noticing the simple furniture, the stack of bills on the table, and the tired look in his eyes. She sat down slowly, and Marcus joined her. "I don't understand," Marcus said finally. "Why would you come all this way to see me?" Mrs. Thompson folded her hands in her lap. "Because kindness should never be forgotten. You gave up something very important to help me, and I can't let that go. Do you realize what you did for me that day?" Marcus lowered his eyes. "I just carried your bag and helped you find your gate. Anyone would have done the same." She shook her head. "No, son. Not everyone would have stopped. I saw people walk past me like I was invisible. But you noticed. You cared. And because of you, I made it safely to my daughter. You may think it was a small thing, but to me, it meant the world." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He didn't know how to respond. For so long, he had lived in a world where his efforts went unnoticed, where his sacrifices seemed invisible. To hear someone speak with such gratitude left him speechless. Mrs. Thompson leaned forward. "Marcus, I could also see that you were struggling. You didn't say anything, but I could tell. And I want to help you, the way you helped me. He shook his head quickly. No, ma'am, you don't owe me anything. I didn't help you for a reward. I just couldn't walk past. I know, she said softly. That's exactly why you deserve help. Because you gave without expecting anything in return. For a moment, the room was silent. Marcus stared at the floor, his heart pounding. He had never been offered help like this before. Life had always demanded he carry his own weight, fight his own battles. To hear someone offering support felt strange, almost unreal. Then Mrs. Thompson said something that changed everything. Marcus, I used to run my own business. I worked for many years, built connections, and even though I'm retired now, I still know people who could use someone like you. I want to introduce you to them. Marcus's eyes widened. Wait, what do you mean? I mean, she said firmly, I can connect you to opportunities better than the one you missed. Your kindness showed me the kind of man you are. And I believe good men deserve good chances. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. But he was also cautious. Life had taught him not to believe in good news too quickly. Are you sure? He asked. Why would they listen to you about me? Mrs. Thompson chuckled softly. Because they trust me. And if I tell them you are worth meeting, they will believe it. You have the character, Marcus. I saw it in you at the airport. Skills can be taught, but kindness and integrity cannot. You already have what matters most. Marcus sat back, his mind spinning. Was this real? Could it be possible that missing his flight had not been the end but the beginning of something else? He looked at Mrs. Thompson, her kind face glowing with sincerity, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel hope. That evening, they talked for hours. Mrs. Thompson asked about his life, his family, his struggles. Marcus shared his story, the long years of hard work, the constant battles with bills, the dreams he had carried since he was young. She listened carefully, nodding, her eyes filled with compassion. When she finally stood up to leave, she placed her hand on his shoulder. You're not alone anymore, Marcus. I'll make sure of that. After she left, Marcus sat in silence, trying to process everything. He looked around his small apartment, at the bills and the empty shelves, and for the first time, those things didn't feel like chains around his neck. Something inside him had shifted. There was light now where before there had only been darkness. The next day, true to her word, Mrs. Thompson began making calls. She reached out to former colleagues, old friends, and people in her network. Within a week, Marcus was sitting in meetings he could never have imagined on his own. He wore his best shirt, polished his shoes again, and carried himself with quiet determination. Each time he entered a room, he remembered Mrs. Thompson's words, skills can be taught, but kindness cannot. Those words gave him confidence. He still faced challenges, his rent was still due, his bills still waited, but now he had something he hadn't had before, a real chance. A chance that came not from luck or money, but from a simple act of kindness that had circled back to him in the most unexpected way. And late at night, when Marcus sat on his couch thinking about it all, he realized something powerful. The flight he had missed wasn't the end of his journey. It was just a detour, one that had led him to something even greater. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced before. For the first time in his life, doors began to open instead of shutting in his face. Mrs. Thompson kept her promise. She introduced him to people in her network, business owners, managers, and professionals who were willing to give him a chance because she believed in him. At first, Marcus felt nervous. He wasn't used to sitting in offices with polished floors, tall glass windows, and people in suits. He worried that they would see him as out of place, just a man who had spent years lifting boxes and cleaning floors. But each time he sat across from someone new, he reminded himself of what Mrs. Thompson had told him, kindness and integrity cannot be taught. You already have those. The rest will come. Her words gave him courage. He spoke honestly about his work ethic, his experiences, and his dreams. He didn't pretend to be someone he wasn't. He simply showed them the determination that had carried him through years of struggle. To his surprise, people listened. They respected his honesty and admired his resilience. Within a month, Marcus was offered a job that was far better than the one he had missed the interview for. The position came with steady pay, health benefits, and the chance to learn new skills. When he held the offer letter in his hands, his heart swelled with emotion. He thought back to the night he had sat alone, staring at his ceiling, wondering if life would ever change. Now, change had come in the most unexpected way. The first day at his new job felt surreal. He wore a borrowed tie from a friend, polished his shoes again, and walked into the building with his head held high. The office smelled of fresh coffee and paper, and the hum of computers filled the air. He took his seat at his new desk, looking around in disbelief. After years of working jobs that drained his body, he was finally in a place where his mind and character mattered. Every day, Marcus gave his best. He arrived early, stayed late, and learned everything he could. His supervisors quickly noticed his dedication. They saw that he wasn't just working for himself, he carried the weight of his family and his past struggles in every task he did. He was driven by something deeper than ambition, he was driven by hope. Meanwhile, Mrs. Thompson and Marcus grew close. She often invited him to her home for dinner, where her daughter and grandchildren welcomed him warmly. For Marcus, it felt like finding a family he didn't know he needed. Mrs. Thompson became like a grandmother to him, offering advice, encouragement, and even scolding him gently when he doubted himself. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset, Marcus turned to her and said, "You didn't have to do all this for me. Why did you go so far?" She smiled, her eyes reflecting the golden light. "Because you reminded me of something important. In a world where people rush past each other, you stopped. You saw me. And that told me everything I needed to know about your heart. Kindness should always be rewarded, Marcus. I only did what was right." Her words stayed with him. Months passed, and Marcus's life began to transform. He paid off his overdue bills, stocked his fridge with more than just bread and milk, and even sent money to help his mother and sisters. For the first time, he didn't feel ashamed when his sisters called. Instead, he spoke with pride, telling them about his new job and the plans he had for the future. His mother's voice, filled with joy, reminded him that all the years of struggle had been worth it. But the change wasn't just about money or stability. Marcus himself began to see the world differently. He realized that sometimes, life's greatest blessings come disguised as setbacks. Missing that flight had felt like the end of everything, but it had actually led him to something far greater. It taught him that doing the right thing, even when it costs you, can open doors you never imagined. He also carried with him a deeper gratitude. Every morning, as he walked into his job, he whispered a quiet thank you to God, to life, and to Mrs. Thompson. He knew he couldn't have reached this place alone. One day, as Marcus sat in his office, he received a message from Mrs. Thompson. She wanted him to meet a young man she had come across, a boy in his late teens who was struggling, just like Marcus once had. Without hesitation, Marcus agreed. When he met the boy, he saw in his eyes the same tiredness, the same weight of responsibility, and the same hunger for a chance. Marcus sat with him for hours, sharing his story, encouraging him not to give up. That day, Marcus realized something powerful. The kindness that Mrs. Thompson had shown him was now flowing through him to others. He was no longer just a man receiving help, he was becoming a man who could offer help, a man who could inspire. Years later, Marcus would often look back on the day at the airport. He could still see the image of Mrs. Thompson struggling with her suitcase, and himself standing there torn between running to his gate or stopping to help. He thought of the flight he had missed, the job he had lost, and the fear he had felt. But now, he smiled whenever he remembered it, because he understood the truth. That moment wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, family, and purpose. Marcus's life became a story he would share with others, a story about how one act of kindness changed everything. People often asked him, "Don't you regret missing that flight?" He would laugh softly and shake his head. "Not at all. If I had caught that flight, I might never have met the person who changed my life." Sometimes, what feels like a loss is really a blessing in disguise. In time, Marcus grew in his career, earning respect and recognition for his hard work. But no matter how far he went, he never forgot where he came from. He continued to help others whenever he could, remembering the days when he himself had nothing but hope to hold on to. And every holiday, he made sure to spend time with Mrs. Thompson and her family. She had become more than a friend, she was family now. They often teased him, calling him her adopted grandson, and Marcus accepted the title with a full heart. As he sat at her table one evening, surrounded by laughter and warmth, Marcus thought to himself, this is what life is about. Not just chasing success, but building connections, spreading kindness, and being there for each other. He had missed a flight, yes. But in missing it, he had found something far more precious: love, support, and a future brighter than anything he had dared to dream. And so, Marcus's story became a reminder to everyone who heard it: sometimes the path you think you've lost is only leading you to a better one. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can come back to you in ways you could never imagine.